When I came here, I was maybe more interested in the whole Barbican area as a location, as a film location, and not so much into the speciality of the curve form as a kind of difficult form to deal with. So I first thought about what kind of film would I like to film here, instead of what kind of work would I like to expose. And then there were different things going on, and I thought of different possibilities, and some ideas which I had for a longer time came into this new setting and changed.
Because the first idea is that the first intention that you had was to use the entire Barbican as a film set that provided you with different scenarios where to stage different things.
Yes, exactly. So one thing was, as you said, the conservatory, which also helped me, or which gave a link to a topic I was at this time researching in, which was uncontacted groups in the rainforest, and which there was also a case last year in the Brazilian rainforest where some people of the Brazilian agency for minorities flew over the rainforest and saw Indians living there, and they said they were previously uncontacted, not contacted. So that was one topic, and the other topic was, at one point I thought also of London as a city of asylum or exile, but this shifted over into this kind of, and melted together with the Barbican as a utopic or dystopic place. So at the end, everything melted together in the case of the Tasadai in the Philippine rainforest. They were contacted in 1971 and made headlines as a group which lived a kind of Stone Age life, and they were in a way exploited for 2 years in terms of National Geographic went there and took photos, and there were people writing books about it, and one guy who tried to use this group as a help for good news and to make a political career in the Philippines, etc. So this group became a projection for
the West.
Yeah.
And so if we go back to the exhibition revolves around mainly several layers, but one is certainly the starting point of the Tasadai being discovered and being sort of branded as prehistoric people living today, like transported by a time machine, right?
Yeah.
And that also brings this idea of isolated people, and the concept of isolation is something that get carried through in the different elements of the exhibition. You can think of the Barbican being a sort of isolated oasis in the city, but also you were looking at, for example, how actors isolate themselves to become, to immerse themselves into a role. And then in this sort of Venn diagram that you've been building, one element that was very interesting that came out of the Tasadai story is like the idea of first contacts, and this idea of people that weren't contacted before, and the consequences of Western civilization getting in touch, or any other civilization they hadn't been in touch with before, getting in touch with somebody who thought that the world was that much more circumscribed. So how does it take all these elements sort of become interlocked and come out in different aspects of the films? Because perhaps we should talk about the fact that there's not just one film, but like there's how many, like seven elements.
Elements, yeah. So I tried to develop the story in very different directions. So one thing is, as you said, isolation. The other thing is I wanted to make an exhibition which doesn't have a certain style. Also in my other film projects I try to avoid a certain style, but more try to adopt styles, or yeah, this maybe has also something to do with mimesis, or to take over a style, or to adopt. That's why I decided to make an exhibition which looks like a curated show of video artists making different video works, but about the same theme. And then you look at a certain film and you see the same actor in another film, for example.
So, for example, you have a film that is shot on 35mm that looks like a sort of Hollywood production and sort of language. But then you have like more unrefined video work, and what else have you got?
There's one film which is not even made by myself. It's made by John Nance, who was among the first people to visit the Tasadai and taking photos of them. He made a film about them. There's a work which is just a helicopter flight. And there's a film about a group living on a theater stage. And there's a film about an explorer who came back from the jungle and became immortal through an ancient ritual he undergone. And there's a film, a found footage film, which consists of news clips and other film fragments which comment each other. And there's one film which is a party. So they are all made differently. One's a video. This is a triptych video installation, and the other is 35mm film. And there's a 60mm film.
But they're also different in style in terms of the use of the camera and how the scene is constructed. So it's not just the format. It's not video as opposed to film. Right? It's also like exploring different languages and conventions.
Yeah. So it's also about the idea of an original media or copied media, and video and film. I try to get rid of this question of originality, but at the same time, it has it means something if you film somebody with a black and white 16mm. It reminds us of these these ethnological films I saw in school, or this is one point. And the other thing is to maybe try to show different appearances in media. So, for example, if you are shown in this Hollywood film style as an actor, and then you see yourself in a kind of video interview situation, or you as a visitor, now you don't know exactly if the video style is more true than the 35mm film, but maybe they are both staged.
Which is also something that comes out of the Tasadai story, because the idea is that after a few years of this sensational press that they got because of this association with prehistory and ancient way of living, they also got denounced as possibly having perpetrating a hoax. So it's a story that it's still unclear whether they were really isolated and they were like a complete discovery, or whether they had been staged. So that's an element that you've been interested in previous works as well, but in this case it comes prominent as part of the story, and also possibly as part of the other films, right?
Yes. So when the Tasadai were visited again in '86 by a Swiss journalist, he stated that the Tasadai were only farmers from the neighborhood taking off their clothes and posing for the cameras. But probably this hoax was a hoax itself. So if you go but I'm not completely sure. But I think if you go into the jungle somewhere or to Mindanao in the Philippines, at least from Switzerland, you want to come back with a certain story as well. So there's always some kind of directing.
Some sort of projection that comes with like the building of the truth rather than the problem. And that also brings us back to the idea of, well, we are in the theatre, in Barbican Theatre now, but it brings us back to Barbican as a location. I mean, one of the film that you were talking about with the tribe living on the stage was filmed here on the Barbican stage, and the whole exhibition is called The Fourth Wall. Can you tell us why, and how this is linked to the Tazadai story?
Yeah, after my last film project, I talked to a friend, the Russian director Viktor Schulman, who's living in Berlin, and we talked about the concept of the fourth wall, and for him it was always a very important thing in Russia, that the actors feel alone on stage and they don't feel that an audience is around them, so they can act.
Just to explain very briefly, the fourth wall is basically a wall between the stage and the audience that the actor use. It's a sort of imaginary wall that the actor use to believe that there's no audience, and it also works for the audience to think that they are looking through a transparent wall, so that they can actually believe that what happens on stage is true or real.
And maybe also the audience needs this fourth wall to imagine, or needs the actors on stage to imagine that they are alone. In the audience.
So it's again isolation and borders.
Yeah, it's like it could be a good theoretical concept of projection, which functions for theater, for cinema, but also for everyday life. It's maybe the same thing which I also was interested in Münster, the idea that we walk around the train station and look at everyday life, but we cannot clearly see what is staged and what is not staged, or what is planned and not planned. So,
I mean, in cinema is normally referred to as like the suspension of disbelief, in which you start believing that what is being projected on the screen is actually real life, than
that's the same like in theater.
And there's a reference to the Tazadai, and what you were saying about explorer suspending their disbelief and sort of starting projecting what they want to see onto that sort of empty screen. Or, what they used as an empty screen, although they were people.
Yeah, and then I thought, okay, maybe because in another BBC film I saw there was a similar story. There was traveling in Papua New Guinea, and the purpose was to try to get into unknown territory and try to make a first contact. And the people who paid for this felt trapped, because they thought what happened was staged, and they wanted to have their money back. But the guy said it wasn't staged, it was real, but he couldn't prove it, if it was real or not. So there was a big discussion, and one sentence was, maybe it was too good. Maybe it was real, but if it was real, it was just too good. So I didn't have the chance.
You couldn't believe it.
Yeah. And I couldn't believe it because it was just too good. So maybe the same thing happened with the Tazadai. Of course, we know that they said take off some of the clothes they already had. So there was staging inside, but
so would you say that more or less all these fragments that sort of are going to be projected in different ways inside the code, would you say that they all get together into this idea of projection and how we project belief on things that we see?
It would be good if something like this comes out of it, but at the same time I also didn't want to have a complete clear line in the exhibition, so there are really fragments which maybe come of an outer space. So you first also don't know exactly what does it have to do with the whole exhibition.
Mhm.
For example, the film about the explorer coming back from the jungle.
Mhm.
It doesn't have something to do with the Tassadai.
But it does through different routes, because you also
Yeah.
have like 3 interviews with people in the exhibition, and those. I mean, the whole dramaturgy seems to me that it's very similar to bringing together fragments of your research in a way that you are asking the visitors to understand and to make their own conclusion and to piece together in a way. You called it really a puzzle that has some missing bits, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I in this thing I was really not so much interested in leading or trying to lead the audience with every edit I make, but more trying to make an experiment with different things and media that look different, and trying to I'm looking very much forward on how visitors will see those and get puzzle together.